I went to Ben Franklin and North High. I currently have a student at North High, so I'm very integrally involved in this part of the community. And the reason I'm here is to field your questions. My style is to not only hear your feedback and others' feedback, compare that to the data that is presented to us educationally, academically, fiscally, and strike a balance. And that's my job. If I had my druthers, we would have 150 student school buildings every 6 blocks apart. We'd pay each student, each teacher $100,000 a year. But at what point do we tip that over and balance that out? And that's our job, or at least I feel that's my job as a school board member, to listen to you, understand what's important to you, and then put that into action. Granted, we're not going to make everybody happy. In fact, we're going to make 49% of the people happy in most cases, or 51, whatever you want to say. But there's not a perfect solution, but we're here to hear your concerns, and we're here to hear your questions. And we're ready for the tough questions, and we wouldn't be here if we didn't take what you took, or what your considerations are, seriously. So with that, I won't take any more time. I'd rather take time fielding questions. So thank you.
All right. The first question we have tonight is for either of you, whoever chooses to go first. Please provide some insight into what the district guiding standards are and what process was followed in recently modifying them, because it's our understanding they were changed during the January offsite meeting.
Watch us both run to the door. The guiding principles are pretty much intact. They went through the most significant change that was put into them more recently was to build up the number of sections potentially in schools. While we agreed to have a constant configuration and a consistent configuration, we raised the number of sections in schools to accommodate what's happening in South Fargo. So that was the biggest change in the guiding principles. There were some other minor edits in that, but what was really going on a couple years back was and it's still going on, is the explosion in South Fargo and the Kennedy School situation, which is very different than what's on the radar up here in Horace, Mann and Roosevelt neighborhood. They have, at last count, I heard 734 students. And they're expecting 60, some say as many as 90 students by next fall. We're projecting 200 new students a year. So that situation was critical. We weren't and aren't quite to a position of building a new school. The board added on to Kennedy to get that group of people by with the best judgment they could at that time. So they added the number to how many sections could be in a school. Guiding principles also say things like, here in Fargo, we have a value of smaller class sizes. In elementary class sizes, it's 21 students per class. And it gets up to a little bit bigger by the time you get to high school numbers. But you go across the river and you'll see a big difference in numbers of students in classes. That's a guiding principle, to have smaller class sizes. And that's a critical one. If you change that ratio and increase it to bigger numbers in primary grades or elementary grades, you've just had a profound effect on education and the result and the delivery system. So those guiding principles, yes, we had a retreat and we worked on those issues in a retreat. We edited them and fine-tuned them, but I wouldn't say that there was nothing nothing dramatically changed except for the sections and smaller minor edits as far as my viewpoint of it. So it wasn't like we needed an engagement process to go through and do wordsmithing on the bulk of the principles. Robin, why don't you chime in there too? You know more of the history from way back when as well.
Are you calling me old? I've been around for a while. Okay. Thank you for supplying us with the questions prior. One thing that stood out for me in parentheses here is it is our understanding that they were changed during a January offsite meeting. Offsite to us means, where did we have our last retreat? The Radisson? Okay, so the reason it was offsite, anyway, wherever it was very close to this area. Those meetings are noticed. Those are a work session, which is much different than a board meeting. The dialogue is much more open. There was nothing secretive about it whatsoever. So please be assured that the board isn't trying to hide anything from you. Those agenda minutes are very much available to you. So this board is very transparent, and I want to assure you that was not the case. As far as the as far as the substance to the guiding principles, they were not substantially changed. It was more grammatical, trying to refine, make it easier for groups such as yourselves to understand them. So there was nothing sinister in our efforts there by any means. Those guiding principles were established back in 2001 and 2002 with extensive community output. There was nothing. There were no major changes in them. So, and I would be happy to answer any questions specifically to those as well. I don't know what your format is, but go ahead.
There is a follow-up question that was, what opportunities were there or are there for public input or discussion on the modified guiding standards?
There is always room for community input. I would have to ask substantively what specifically we would want some input on. And I've got my notes here, so I'd be happy to field those questions. Anything specific?
I'm inferring for others, but I think in the flurry of information that comes at us, there's an indication that a budgetary decision has been made. And maybe rather than talking about guiding principles and ideals, maybe you could directly address that bit of information.
I'm not quite sure I'm following that question. So budgetary
We were told that
items.
a monetary recommendation to destroy these two buildings and put up a new school has already been put in front of the board.
That was one of the options that was presented. The board is very much open at this process to all of the considerations, whether that's keeping all of these facilities open or to do our due diligence, we need to look at every scenario. Sorry, we do. And there are many that we don't like. There are many that we do like, but that's why we have a large board to help get that community feedback.
I will chime in too. I've heard this alluded to quite a bit, and we might as well talk about the elephant in the living room. People have concluded that everything's already decided, and people have concluded that there are foregone conclusions, and we're just taking folks down a path to get them where we want to take them.
Like
consolidation. And consolidation, and my role as chair of the committee is to try and keep the process on task and the people adhering to the process. The primary rule I have been implementing as chair of the committee is that we don't have any foregone conclusions and that we don't have decisions in place. We also, early on, the board budgetarily funded about $100,000 to hire some consultants to help us gather the beginnings of data. Rather than having us shooting from the hip and acting emotionally, we need to know as much data as we can, and of course there's always room for more data, but we needed to know where the students are. We needed to know where the students are going to be. We needed to know what the condition of the buildings is. We needed to know what the costs are to go forward with the existing footprints. And then, of course, we need to know what are alternatives. It's so important that we let as many ideas as possible bubble up without hanging our hat on them. And so in that process, there will be moments in time where people will be at a meeting or consultants will give advice that, well, you could do this, you might do this, but our job is to get as many ideas as we can on the table to then make a comparison relative to realities where the students are and what the budgets are. So yes, I know, we all know that there was a meeting of administration on a Friday with our consultants that were looking at the facilities, and we all know that they were beginning to toss out some ideas from their perspective. If you're looking to create efficiencies in the budgetary approach to education, if that's what your need is, and bear in mind, they're not here in North Dakota or from here. So there was a moment in time where a snapshot of a discussion happened where ideas were being thrown out there to be put out there so that they're part of that process of many months of as many ideas as possible. And you saw headlines that said, out with the old, in with the new. But I think that the reality is, and you folks will find out I'm just an eternal optimist, I really sincerely believe we'll all land on the same page, especially with people engaged and with information out there that we all have access to, and that the process is transparent and our intentions are good. Now, that said, there's lots of people in this room who have ideas on what could be done with the district. And there are people at the board table and administratively who also probably have some ideas what could be done. But my job as chair is to try and get us to keep those things to a degree at bay and let the process unfold, because I sincerely believe that we will all get there together and that the right values will land us all in the same place. So one last thing about budgets is, Fargo has $125 to $130 million budget. 78 to 81% of our budget is people. So we really don't have all the room in the world to build new schools or to add on to schools or to do things that are there, and yet with a growing footprint, we need to know, like, how much is the projected need in this particular building. How soon will the HVAC system need to be replaced? What will be the cost of doing that? What will be the cost of doing windows when they are needed, or parking lots, or things of that nature? We'd be remiss if we weren't doing that. And then, of course, there will be people who will say, well, gosh darn it, if you're going to put $3.6 million into this building and $3.2 million into that building, maybe you should build a new school. I'm not sure we'll land there at all. But it of course, will come up in the conversation. So, and the most pressing need in Fargo's district isn't up here. The most pressing need in Fargo's district, the most significant challenges we face now are the South Fargo growth that's taking place in leaps and bounds, where there aren't schools to take care of the population there. That's the most pressing need that's on our radar. That will be the primary focus I'm expecting going forward, is how do we address those urgent needs.
So, John, I think we'll move on to another question, and we'll actually ask you to kind of limit your time for each question. I know there's a lot to cover, but we're trying to cover a lot of questions as well, and we have a few that we'd like to cover from the audience that we've received as well. One thing that's kind of a follow-up to some of what you've been talking about, When the task force process was first introduced and reiterated in the first task force meeting, the public was told that the group would consider all options. There is a perception among many of us observing the task force meetings that the consultants are steering the discussion by providing canned options, asking leading questions, and forcing certain assumptions on the group without allowing the task force to brainstorm their own options. Could you comment on that perception and what impact it is likely to have on the ultimate outcome of this planning process, as you've been indicating that it's all options are open, but the sense is that really the way that the meetings are being held, those options aren't really allowed to really develop.
I've been watching and observing the task force option process, and also from the beginning, many of us championed this notion of bringing people to the table. And in this task force process, for those who don't know, there's 25 members, 12 of whom are representing each geographic elementary school quadrant of town. So half of them represent the schools. Horace Mann-Roosevelt, by the way, has an extra voice because of their neighborhood association, as does the Clara Barton Hawthorne Neighborhood Association. So you have more voice than even the others. I would probably find it pretty difficult to sit on my hands and be in a process like that, where you have a facilitator whose job is to help you get your arms around an immense amount of information and to try coalesce people into a thinking process. But in the end, and frankly, I wouldn't oppose anybody asking for more time and for standing up on their chair and demanding a little more voice. Not that they don't, but I think that'll come. And it might appear that they're being led down a path. Well, they're just getting to the point where the rubber's hitting the road. And we'll see what ideas they come up with, and we'll see what their recommendations are, and we'll see if they have a consensus or not, and then we'll see how the public reacts to their process. So I'm hanging my hat on giving it the best shot to let it work, to see where they go.
So do you anticipate the possibility of the task force being able to do just some brainstorming on their own? To date, what they've been doing is just sort of looking at some hypothetical options, which have already been set for them. And I think those of us who have been watching, it would be really good to see these talented individuals basically come together and brainstorm their own options.
I'll lay down another ground rule, but and then I'll answer it in the context best I can. The board members who are at that, observing that process, are not involved in it. We are watching it so that it doesn't look like we're like dictating where it goes and how it goes. And there's a level of trust that the consultant facilitator will guide those people down a path where they'll be able to come to a consensus. But you know, I know there's some very strong personalities. We didn't stack the deck in who's in that group. In fact, some of the strongest critical, most vocal critics in the community who thought you're just out to close our schools are sitting there at the table. And some people think, well, you're not communicating with the city. Well, we have one of the key senior planner from the city at the table. You know, we have a city commissioner at the table. So I really think that they won't, knowing the people there, what I'm seeing of it, they're not going to lay idly by and let the boat leave the dock without them having a sense of comfort with what their contribution to the end consensus is. I just think that will happen naturally, and we'll see. I think it will. I really do. I hope it does too.
I think there might be some confusion, and I'm a little confused, quite frankly, on what we expect from our long-range facility plan task force. Do we expect a recommendation, or do we expect
expect feedback on what's proposed. I think we as board members need to give them a little bit more direction, quite frankly.
I think we would agree with you on
Yeah,
that.
and we went into this process hiring professionals that run this process and have a great background and locally and nationally on how they seek feedback. So I think it's our job as board members to give them a little bit more direction. We went in with let's back up. And one of the questions here, and maybe I'll jump ahead, how were they chosen? The board gave administration a budget to hire consultants to not only study our facilities, existing facilities, but also our demographics of where our students are, where they've been, and where they expect to be in the future. And I was amazed at the data that was presented. We've never had this much data as a school board, at least in my memory. So we weren't trying to duck partnering with the community by any means. What we were trying to do is, first of all, bring the objective data in, and now the emotional piece is coming in. Obviously, there's a lot of emotion in this room. Thank you. But that needs to be part of this puzzle. So we've got the objective data, now we're adding in the emotional data, and now we as board members need to weigh that. So I think you're right on. We need to give a little bit more direction to RSP, who is directing these community task force meetings, and point well taken. I don't know what else I can say.
Thank you. Next question, how can the public have a meaningful part of this decision-making process when only 2 input meetings have been identified? And these meetings are meant for the task force members to take direct input from the public?
All right. Again, this is a process. We needed to hang our hat on something, so we had a process. Is it perfect? No. Will we know if it's perfect? No. We won't know for 20 years from now. But we needed to agree to something to present to the public. Again, we're here to get your feedback. Are 2 meetings enough? We don't know. So again, that's why we're here. We need your feedback. Nothing is set in stone at this point from any aspect.
I'll just briefly add, too, that it's really important to do what you're doing, and that is to show up and be part of it. And this is an example of that. I've spoken, I've been part of several of these meetings across town, and people are showing up. And if you come to our school board meetings of recent, people are showing up and speaking up. And if you read the letters to the editor, people are putting their 2 cents in. So there's an immense amount of time ahead of us, an opportunity ahead of us all to give our voice and to listen and learn and to advocate and contribute. So that process isn't done, and it's not nipped in the bud, nor is it over. We celebrate. We serve at the beck and call of the people as elected officials of the people. So we're listening. And of course, there's a lot of good, strong messaging with the right heart behind it.
Thanks, John and Robin. Follow-up question to that, going back to the decision-making process. How do you respond to the perception that this approach is meant to insulate both the school board and the administration from direct public contact?
I think John addressed that earlier. I will say I wouldn't be here if that was the case. Obviously, neither of us shy away from public input. We needed a system in place. As board members, we wanted to sit back and observe your feedback to an objective outside consultant. In fact, we had to fight for that, quite frankly, because we needed to make sure that we needed to make sure that more than 2 board members could be in the room at the same time. So we went through some obstacles to make sure that could happen. And that's why Chris and Paul are here tonight, to hear your feedback and to hear your emotions. So by no means are we trying to insulate ourselves from your feedback. And I hope we're demonstrating that by being here tonight.
Okay, so one of the things that we want to do is maybe clarify with the audience here why we're asking for cards. We want to be able to give everybody the opportunity to ask questions, and we've hopefully been trying to represent some of those questions for you. So I'm going to hit on some of the questions. We've been getting lots here. So first of all, there's some questions having to do with economics. We've talked about financing and cost. And one of the issues that comes up regularly is size of school, and obviously that's a concern for us. What evidence do you have that a larger school will give students a better education? And then kind of another question that came from another person as well is, states a little bit more definitively, why does the school board push for mega schools when parents, teachers, students prefer smaller schools, and research shows larger schools perform worse than small schools and typically don't reduce costs? Can you address those concerns?
One of the things I know that's important to the board members, and this is consistent in our voting and how we speak, is small class sizes are ideal. And as I said earlier, 10 to 1 would be even more ideal. Maybe not. Maybe that doesn't give enough personalities within one room. But yes, of course, smaller class sizes and smaller schools opt for a better education. The big question is, and I'm sorry, it's my job to say at what cost. And it's my job to figure out what the tipping point is. So again, if we could give teachers a fortune to teach like they deserve, and we could have small class sizes, and we could have small schools, that would be the ideal. And we all are here to educate our kids. But again, it's the tipping point, and I'll keep saying that because that is my job as a board member, to figure out where that sweet spot is. It's not glamorous, it's not fun, it's not easy, but don't for a second think that any board member is going to compromise the education for our kids. Again, we get just as much feedback from those that are saying, and I've been out in the community, and I know a lot of people, tell me what you're thinking. We like neighborhood schools. I love my neighborhood school. I love the north side. I refuse to live south siders, I refuse to live anywhere else in Fargo when I moved back. I opted, well, that's a different story. But I like the neighborhood feel up here. And I value that, and I know a lot of you do because you're here. But I have a lot of other people under their breath say, how long can we maintain these small schools? And so I have to look at this point of view and that, and I need to balance that. So don't for a second think that anybody on this board will compromise the education for our kids. The board approved some changes in the guiding principles. Originally, they were set up by the community to have 3 to 4 sections per elementary school. Partially due, I feel, to some of the conversations on the south side, the board approved to have bigger schools. I was in the minority. I was voted against, but that's okay. I'm going to live with that because I have to value what the majority of the board says. I prefer smaller schools. But I was in the minority. So we need to live with that and make the best of it. So again, we need to find that sweet spot. We also need to think about the feeders to the middle and high schools. Ideally, we're looking at K-5, 6, 8, 9, 12. 600 in an elementary school, 900 in a middle school, 1,200 in high school. That is very generic, but those are our guidelines. And it all needs to fit into a larger puzzle. And so elementary is probably the most important and formative part of our kids' education, but we need to look at the bigger picture as well.
One of the thoughts as an observer in the Fargo processes is, times they are changing. When I was a kid visiting off the farm to come to Fargo, 13th Avenue South was the way south end of town. Now it's kind of the beginning of North Fargo. The last maps I saw of where Fargo is going, and I see 2 city commissioners here, was the maps were going beyond 124th Avenue South. If you can imagine that. And in the old days, it's just as a sense, this building we're in here right now, I'm guessing it's on maybe 4 or 5 acres, and the infrastructure is here. I used to hear Paul Myers say this, and now I'm appreciating it with different data. But this building's paid for. Just so y'all know, the total dollar investment in Roosevelt School since it was constructed in 1921, generally speaking, is $1.6 million. It's a lot of bang for the buck. And it's a lot of result that comes out of here for the investment dollar. You're going to be surprised, Horace Mann, which is a little bit older, and bear in mind, no significant improvements were done on these buildings for over something like 60 years. Horace Mann, the total dollar investment, total of capital improvement projects is $575,000. So these are very significant quantifiers. Nobody wants mega schools in South Fargo. But we somehow also, you might have seen a forum poll recently where they're talking about what the growth is in the town, and there was a quick poll in the forum. Would people even vote for a new elementary school in South Fargo? And last I saw, a significant majority of Fargoans were saying no. So there's a balance in this. People seem to use the number of 600 students now. Northside schools, we kind of use numbers of 300 students now up to per schools. And you just hear those numbers. But our design, we don't want an elementary school bigger than North Fargo North either. And so somewhere there's a balance in this. And I'm confident, I'm really confident we'll all land on the same page. And one last comment is, Robin alluded to it, it's not just families. Teachers also and staff also make choices what kind of environment they want to be in. And people sometimes like to be able to walk to their school. Some people like to have their kids go to a school where their teachers and administrators know the names of every single kid in there and the value that the value is just priceless, immense. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, John. Another question for you from the audience. It says repurposing is the word the school board uses. Repurposing means close the school and or use it for something else. Having a neighborhood school helps keep property values stable and keep a neighborhood stable. People may purchase homes in neighborhoods with schools. People do not purchase homes in neighborhoods where schools have been shut down and used for other functions. Can you appreciate the concern if a school is repurposed?
Absolutely, I can. And I might differ a little, I would beg to differ a little bit with that statement. Studies have shown that schools that are repurposed in an effective way actually increase your property values. I think I know the administration and the board throughout the repurpose, remodel, because I didn't want to say close. And so that was a semantics approach to softening the message, maybe, to tempering the feelings out there. Would it be ideal to have a neighborhood school within the neighborhood? I think we're at the point, gang, where we need to decide what is a neighborhood. We are correct. This is the Roosevelt neighborhood. Horace Mann is the Horace Mann neighborhood. And I am not going to try to pose you against the South Side, but their neighborhoods are much larger. So at what point, again...
We are Horace Mann, Roosevelt neighborhood. We are one. We are as equal to those South Side school neighborhoods as any other neighborhood in Fargo.
Correct.
I don't know about anybody else, but I take huge offense. Because I may live over by Oak Grove, but my kids go to school here. And since we moved from the south side to the north side, I know every person in this building. much better education since we moved to the north side.
Thank you. And I beg to differ because that's the Horace Mann neighborhood and this is the Roosevelt neighborhood, and I respect that. I'm not saying anybody's going to get any less of an education, whether it's on the north side or the south side. But again, we need to figure out and define what a neighborhood is, and we need to figure out at what tipping point do we keep these schools open or build or enhance or put more money into. Nobody has mentioned here tonight that we intend to close the school.
Just a quick comment from the audience. They said small neighborhood schools were paid for many years ago, so we don't get too far from that topic. The new schools cost $12 million. Please don't make that seem like Northside schools are a detriment to Southside.
Certainly not. And this is not take one school off one on the north side to put one new one on the south side. No way. We need to take care of our students where they're at, and that is our responsibility.
The notion of repurposing, the other day I was up in McKinley School, and McKinley's a nice, tight little school that makes AYP. Their results are there, and the results in small schools are there. So an example of repurposing right now that you'll see as part of this process, and by the way, we can go past 8 if people need to. I'll go as long as people have questions. I don't care. I don't want people to feel like we're rushing out here. But an example of repurposing is being explored right now in light of the Kennedy School population explosion and student number challenge. There are proposals moving forward now where they will repurpose the Eagle Center to redirect another group of students there, K through 2, the first year from Bluemont Lakes area, which is a neighborhood without a school, and I hope that changes someday, and repurpose that Southside facility to address needs. Another example of repurposing, you might go to West Fargo, but we could have it here. People might talk about having a STEM school. A few years ago, when I was new to the board, I'm the fiscal tightwad flaming liberal guy, okay? And I was looking, and we had this declining population, and we had these issues of growth issues in South Fargo, and I was the one advocating we need to explore closing down the Eagle Center, at least explore that. We need to explore moving the district office out of where it's at into other available space. Now the truth of it is we need if we put all the kids in our elementary schools, we don't have any extra room. Plain and simple. So even the notion of a magnet school, a STEM school, some would say STEAM, where you add arts into it. I don't know if we have the luxury of the space even to do those things right now. But those are examples of repurposing. One last thought about neighborhood schools. When I was visiting with Kennedy people, and their dynamics are very different. About a month and a half ago, I told them about you folks, and I told them about the value of being activists, and I told them about the traction that can be gotten by coalescing your voice and standing up. You know what they've done? They've created a neighborhood association. And they have 160 members in about a month's time. So you're an example to them, and they're going to be players in Fargo's future here on out, because now there's another neighborhood association where the people and their values are coming to the table. So it's you're setting, helping other people see the roles they can have in their parts of the community also.
Thanks, John. For John and Robin, in relation to GO 2030, the city's recently adopted comprehensive plan includes, as part of their education section, this goal. Retention of neighborhood schools says this about the goal. A serious issue facing our core neighborhoods is declining enrollment at its local schools. Once the doors are shuttered, the neighborhoods not only lose a school, but it loses its sense of community. Fargo will focus on retaining these important neighborhood assets. Many of us have the view that the school district planning is not in line with the city of Fargo's plans. Can you address this apparent lack of cooperation with the city?
Several thousand people participated in the Go 2030 process. Many of you, I'm sure, also did. And we have people in the room here who were key in that process. The school district had two people sitting at their steering level table in that as well. One of the good things I think coming out of this process today is the planning department is, and Dan Molly in particular, is voicing the desire to how can we keep this newer, higher level of communication going forward? And how can we keep that engagement level at where it's at? I'd like to dispel, though, the notion that there's a problem with, a significant problem with declining enrollment in North Fargo. That's not the circumstance now. North Dakota's in a different place today than it was even a few years ago, and so is Fargo. And that's our challenge now, is how do we handle the growth coming to us and to the state, somewhat from the oil boom. It's reaching us more than we know. We're projecting we're expecting 200 students per year for no fewer than 5 years. Well, that's a new elementary school, in theory, every 2.5 years. That's the kind of challenges we face as a community, is that type of growth. So just to put it at ease, there are some schools like Washington or Longfellow might have a little bit more space, but that's not a real problem. And Madison is full, and McKinley is full. And McKinley even has a portable outside. It's that full. And they're getting the results.
So, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to underscore, the school district pairs very closely with the city. Who are the city commissioners here? I can't see that far. Mike? Melissa? Okay. The school district pairs very closely with the city. The school board meets regularly with the elected bodies, and our administration meets very regularly. I was not part of Go 2030. I've read it. That is in it. From perception, I agree. That is an opinion paragraph in my view. I don't disagree with it. Please know that we work very closely with all of the entities within Fargo. We cover our bases. We don't work in isolation. We need to put schools where the kids are, guys. And do we have control over where people build their houses? Initially, no. We know that when we build schools, people will build around them. And so that we struggle with that give and take, and it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. But again, I want to assure you we work very closely with all the other entities within town.
Thank you. And so kind of with what you mentioned as far as the growth, I think maybe our city leaders could maybe speak to this a little bit more, but at some point the move south is going to become unsustainable, and the kind of land that's being built on, there's issues with that. We also are going to see north, as housing stock begins to become open, as people retire and move into other areas. We have a much more mixed generational neighborhood up here. And as that changes, housing stock will open. And so I think some of the concern we have is that the long view isn't long enough. Okay? So one of the questions that we have is, when are we going to move to a 25-year plan?
I wish I had a crystal ball. Right now, we had trouble predicting 10 years out. We have trouble predicting 2 months out right now with the growth in Fargo. North Fargo obviously does not have any room to grow north. We run into the West Fargo School District, run into the airport. There are natural cycles that neighborhoods go through, and we have, since prior to my being on the board, when I sat through all these long-range facility plan meetings a decade ago, There were cycles that they studied, and RSP, which I do have confidence in their research and their data. Maybe not their process, but their data. They can figure out how these cycles work. And so at some point you have to hang your hat on something, because you can't predict if you don't have history and trends and data. So we need to come up with the most logical data and arrive at that. And yes, we have many empty nesters that won't give up their homes in North Fargo, myself included. But when do they cycle through? And there's no secret that the North Side has a more mature neighborhood, but they will cycle through. And we were here 10 years ago, gang. If we don't make some changes now, and please don't take this as a threat, we'll be back in the same position, I predict, 7 to 10 years from now. And so and Ken and I have had this conversation. We've just been here. Why are we having this conversation again? The school board, prior to my being on the board, paired these schools together to sustain these schools.
We didn't want that then either.
Correct, and now everybody loves it. The majority do. Well, that's what I'm hearing. Claire Barton and Hawthorne love it as well. The majority of parents that I talk, seriously, the majority that I talk to love the K-2, 3, 5. I don't like it, personally. I don't agree with it. But I am on board because it kept these schools open.
This school will stay open even if we live in them. We have the neighborhood to support them both.
But at the same time, is that the best thing for education?
Absolutely.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
This school has been here for 90 years. My house was built in 1926. I have a child at the other school and I have a child here. It's not broken.
Correct. I totally agree.
It's not broken.
It's not the ideal to have these schools split up, but that is the board's demonstration to keep these buildings open. It's not the ideal. We've got people that don't like it, and we have people that do. Trust me.
So we're going to keep this school open with NDSU buying it, and you're going to close.
I don't have an answer right now. I don't have an answer. I'm here to get your feedback.
I will chime in here for a moment. Just bear with us.
How about we raise our hand? Everybody in the audience, who wants to close our school? Raise your hand.
Well, I'm not sure anybody, I'll ask people to listen when we say, I don't know anybody who's saying your school is being closed. Sorry. Okay? But times are changing, folks. I wasn't on the board 10 years ago, but they were looking at a very different projection for student population than we're looking at now. Is that my mic?
Yeah. Would you mind sharing your mic? That'd be okay.
I don't know. Well, if you're not
So back to the question at hand. I would like to see us have a result out of this where we do look further than 7 to 10 years and we set into place a dynamic, fluid process that's constantly visioning the future. And especially with the changes now, before I was here, Bob Jansen in the room, we both were editing the newspapers in Grafton. You go to a community and look at the dynamics where their population's doing this, and the challenges those communities face. That's not what Fargo's facing now. Fargo's facing this. West Fargo is facing this. North Dakota is facing this. So we got to get our arms around this and not act out of fear so much, but act out of opportunity. Problems create opportunities. And I like that idea of us visioning further. And that's what I think Dan Mullen is getting at. Let's keep this, I see another planning person down Mayo over there. Let's keep this ball rolling. I'm going to just interject for a moment. In the last 2 years, I think a lot of us probably in reality wished we would have maybe started this process a few years ago. When Davies was being built, we probably should have realized then we don't have a plan anymore in place. Our superintendent, when we hired Dr. Schatz, that was one of his foundations of his candidacy, was this district. if he's going to lead it. You're the policy makers, he's the operational director. If this district's going to move forward under his leadership at the helm, you're going to have a plan and you're going to work the plan. So there's good that is in that. But in the last few years, we've closed Woodrow, and we've added on to Kennedy. We've just added on to Centennial, and we've sold off the Dakota Boys and Girls Ranch classrooms. I'm just I think we're all really happy. The sooner we get a plan in place that has the most input of everybody we can, the more likely we'll at least be all more so than not going in the same direction.
Thank you. Just based on what the consultants have given you for information that we've seen or been able to see so far, they're telling us that there's a decline in growth in the small neighborhood schools, yet people in the neighborhoods are seeing growth in our neighborhoods. So we're wondering what the metrics are other than other metrics than new and financial you're using to make your decisions. I'm not sure what the new.
I can clarify that.
Okay.
I hear a lot about financial decisions for your thinking process, and I respect both of you being here. I thank you both for being here. On the other hand, I'd like to know three things. Okay, my first thing is I do a lot of strategic planning. That's my profession, and so I hope you respect the theory that I'm providing. One is that typically when we do long-range strategic planning, we have other benchmarks than financial that we apply, and I'm sure you have them. Because I hope and I pray that the people that we all elected to represent us will make a different decision based on different metrics other than financial. Because this is not a financial decision. This is a decision about families and children. And how dare anybody think that we should accept a financial metric only.
You had 2 and 3 I'm waiting for? I'm writing this down, Dean.
Okay. My second question is that being a consultant myself, that's how I make a living, I know that there's certain toolkits that I bring to my profession, and that's why I get paid well to do my profession. I also know that on occasion I am asked to provide clients and customers of my service previous recommendations that I've made so we can balance whether they have some type of leading philosophy. Are they predominantly recommending to their other clients big schools only? Because that's the research they've gathered. I'm a researcher, so I can gather data to support big schools, and I can gather data to support small schools. I'm wondering if it's appropriate for the board to share with us their last 3 recommendations, even without client names, that indicate what they recommended to their previous clients, because then I would know that they recommend both saving small schools and building big schools, because I'm not confident in the process. That's my second question. You're telling me.
Yeah, and just kind of to expand a little bit on that, I think that's been some of the concern as we've been watching the task force process, is that we're not confident in the data that's being supplied. We're wondering what direction it's coming from, and as I don't know your name, but thank you. I think the concern is that it's a narrow focus as far as what's being presented to the task force.
My third question is more of a comment. Well, it's not a comment, it's a question. My third question is that the last time, I almost didn't come tonight, and I have to tell you why. Because the last time I came to when we were consolidating schools, I was called an emotional mom. I am emotional. There's my son right there. Am I not emotionalizing? Yes. I am also extremely logical and I'm a business person. And I was dismissed because I was considered an emotional mother. Will you please not talk to my emotion? Will you please talk to my logic? And my logic is I don't see the information and I don't see the data, okay? So my last question is, when I went through that consolidation process, I'm very disappointed in my school board, and I'm usually the one that cheers for you guys because I don't ever want your job, okay? So if I don't want it, I shouldn't do that. But what happened in that process, and I don't know if any of you were involved in this, and I hope not, but from school board members, what happened is they told us that decision wasn't made. And every conversation we had only led us towards that. I would have much rather been respected by my school board and have them to have the courage to stand up in front of me and say, we're going to consolidate, shut up, than to lead me astray like what they did. I wasted a lot of time and a lot of energy. So I'm just nervous. I'm not frustrated.
It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. I'm a little nervous too. Okay, your first question was families and children are very important to you. They're very important to us as well. To say finances, it has to be one of the considerations.
Why?
It has to be.
Why?
Why does it have to be the largest?
It's not the largest.
It is.
Why does it have to
It
be?
really is. It always is.
It has to be. And please.
So then you're not listening to us then?
Absolutely, I am. But we need to weigh all of these things. We need to weigh education and family and children. And so, and that is the different personalities that are elected to the board and the values that they bring. So we have to, as representatives of taxpayers as well, and the families and the teachers, and most importantly the kids, we are responsible to weigh all those things. So I will never say that finance, it cannot be involved in this consideration. I hope you understand that. Number two, there's not a one-size-fits-all for this city, obviously. Each of our neighborhoods have personalities, and our board respects that, some of us more than others, and that will absolutely be considered. I can't speak for other board members, but I am one that will, and from the sense that I get from the rest of the board members, they are going to respect the personalities of these neighborhoods. Obviously, we can't put a 600-student school to replace Horace, Mann-Roosevelt. There aren't enough kids. Hence, we can't have a one-size-fits-all. Hence, the reason we're here to get feedback, just like you shared. Number three, don't lead. There aren't any supposed scenarios here. It would be, I don't know what we'd be doing if we just said, give me your feedback, we'll build off of what you said. We need to throw things out there and get your feedback. If that's right or wrong, nobody knows, but we need to come in with a process. So scenarios are being thrown out there. Do we all agree on how they were thrown out there? Probably not. But that's why we're here to get your feedback. There will never be a perfect solution to the whole district, but we need, I'm going to say it again, we need to balance all those things. And yes, finance is one part of that, one part of that. But that is by no means the most important or trumping part. I can't speak for other board members, but I can very much sense that that is truly the case of most board members prior and now. And we have a prior school board member in here who was part of that process before. And I want you to know that these people have a good heart, and they're not out to get the neighborhoods by any means. And they're very reasonable people. And I support their decisions. I truly do, but I know that they weighed the right components to make those decisions. So thank you for your feedback.
Robin, and John, actually, I think one of the concerns is that there seems to be you're saying it's not just finances that we're looking at, but I think the concern is nobody really understands what else we are looking at. And so there's that sense of lack of transparency, and that extends to the task force as well. And getting again to the point that was made in the audience, it does seem like, based on how they've been conducting the meetings, that there seemed to be a kind of direction that they're pushing the task force. And that's the rate of concern that's coming out of
You're
this.
spot on. And that's the reason those consultants were brought in, to keep this objective, to bring in the facts. Now it's our job to connect your emotions to this.
But I think the concern is that the consultants are not doing that.
Well, and that's where I've got in my notes here that we need to communicate that with them. So thank you.
I believe that it's important to understand the role of a board. Just simply, we have one employee, that's a superintendent. We monitor and breathe life into and tweak policies, and we have legislative budgetary obligations. So when it comes to the board's daily or ongoing activities, what we measure is results, and I'm gonna make this issue as simply complex as I can. You have a big community, and you have so many dynamics in place. We have about 11 to 12% of our student population, which are special needs students. We have something like 7% to our ELL students. We have 29% of our students who live in poverty, even here in Fargo. We have a range of 5 to 80% of poverty pockets by school, even. And our job as a community is to give the very best education to every kid every day in every way. That's our job as a community, and I think that's the community value. So there's a lot of, and then we have population pockets. Where we have I'll just say this, this school here has maybe the least number of students around it now with NDSU's expansion. What do you do with that? This school here, paired with Horace Mann, has the more amenable footprint, if anybody decided ever, if they were to enhance the physical plant here. But it's where the students aren't as much as, for example, Horace Mann. You have Madison over there, which is full of kids around it. And so these types of things come into play, and it's a real delicate balance. And people see these numbers of cost per student. Well, what one of the consultants did is told us the energy costs per the buildings, and you can't even compare that. You know, you got some with geothermal and some old buildings that are way different efficiencies and so on, and some don't have air conditioning. And 6 schools don't in our district. So those numbers don't tell us squat, actually, sometimes. But I think your point is well taken, and people have this notion that we're driving this by economics, and that's what's all we care about. And I can tell you, for example, I don't know if Chris Wallman's in the back of the room, but way back in the very beginning of this process, she made it really clear, and everybody's going, yes, absolutely. We, as a part of this measure, is, in any discussions, is the educational result of the facilities that we're talking about, whatever that means. If there's changes or if there's not changes, if there's a status quo or whatever. But we have to and get to measure the educational result for all those kids. And that's the bottom line, is keeping kids in school and getting them through 12th grade too. You don't have a 15% dropout rate. That's a community issue.
So I think we'll make this our final question/comment from the more formal, but it sounds like you guys are willing to continue having those conversations, and I'm sure there's nobody out there that wants to talk to them, but so Amy is a member of the task force, and so she has some particular insight, so she's going to share that.
Hello, I wasn't planning to speak, but someone suggested that as a task Force member, I offer some input. Meryl Pepcorn is the other representative for our school. I don't see him here. But we would both welcome your input. I don't know how, obviously the process is a little complicated as you hear, so I don't know how useful I can be with that, but I'm happy to take your input as well. 2 of the 3 scenarios that were shared with us last week were schools at Horace Mann that are 680 students. And that was closing Roosevelt and placing a building at Horace Mann that is 682 capacity. And so the comment that there aren't enough students, well, the map, the redrawn map, in fact, extends the, I guess we would call it Horace Mann School boundary all the way to 76th Avenue North. Certainly not a neighborhood school for these children. And this has got to be impossible, and I believe that this is not a scenario that you have presented, but this is one of the ones that the consultants have provided to us, and it's a waste of our time. I don't have a specific question.
Amy, I have been watching the process, and I would say this: as I understand it, as an observer, what the folks in that process are going through is an exercise to get them to the point where they have a sense of each other, they've gotten a sense of the different types of things to weigh, and the types of scenarios to explore, and then they will dig into it, and in the end will exercise their voice. Now, if those members, and I know you and certainly not Meryl, are not wilting, shrinking violets, if the folks that are on that process task force that represent your neighborhood and or represent your PTAs, if they sit on their laurels and just let people drive them down a path and they don't stand up for what they believe in, it will have been a waste. But I don't think that'll happen at all. I couldn't imagine people taking the suggested types of scenarios. I didn't find, as an observer, any of the 3 palatable. I don't think any of you did either, frankly. They weren't palatable. They weren't even realistic. But I'm confident in the end. I'm just really hoping and expecting that we will have come from that process some suggestions that reflect the people there. And it won't have been a waste. And that's, maybe I'm just, do you remember the 2nd Avenue Bridge years ago, where you come across from Moorhead, there's that bridge, and painted on the wall for years for all to see was, "Go Lemmings, go." It was my favorite graffiti. But, if people go over the cliff together and get led down a primrose path and all go over to their own end and let that happen, it will have been a waste. That graffiti was later replaced with "Work, robots, work." It's a great wall for graffiti, but there's good social messaging in that. So I'm really confident in you, Amy, and I know, and in the people in that process, that they're going to have some real substantive messaging that reflects what they're really all about, and also will meet the desire of a global view of the district. I'm really just optimistic as all heck that it won't be a waste. And I challenge everybody in that process, you two and others, to, of course, stand up for what you believe in, because that's why you're there. You're representing these people. And you also have that charge as well to bring voice to this contingencies, constituents, this group of constituents to bring that to the process. And I think there's immense weight to that voice.
Well, Robin?
To me, about 150 students at Horace Mann, don't quote me on these numbers, 150 at Horace Mann and 164 at Roosevelt don't add up to 680. So, Amy, you have every right to question those numbers. I, for one, am not personally interested in busing students from 76th Avenue South to these schools.
So, I think, again, if we could just say we're going to hold you to engaging maybe more with the consultants, as it sounds like you're arriving at that conclusion, and I think we would really like to see that happen as well. Again, we want to just thank everybody for coming. We want to thank